And welcome everybody to RealAg Live, this Tuesday edition of the show. Thanks a lot for tuning in. We're going to be talking agronomics today, more specifically Western Canadian agronomics for the most part. Maybe we'll squeeze in something. Jeremy has a bit of a background in other parts of the country, so maybe we'll squeeze something in and give him a bit of a challenge. But today we're going to be talking to Jeremy Boychyn. He is the Agronomy Research Extension Specialist with Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission. If you have any questions for Jeremy today on the show, all you got to do is enter your question in the comment box, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. I think also we're on LinkedIn. So if you have a question, bring it forward. We'll get to as many of them as we possibly can in our 30-minute edition here of RealAg Live. Let's bring in Jeremy here right now. Hey, Jeremy, how's it going? Hey, man, I'm doing good. Thanks a lot for doing this. I'm looking forward to today's discussion for sure. Yeah, and we're actually getting out of the field and actually get to see some of this stuff growing, especially after that rain last week that we had in good parts of Western Canada. Now, certain parts were hoping for rain, and other areas, though, of Western Canada trying to avoid it, specifically the Peace River region. Yeah. Hey, Jeremy, just hold on one sec. We got a technical issue. I just got to try to get through it. People are having a hard time hearing you. I can, but they can't. So just give me 1 second here, okay? Why is that working that way? I know exactly why. Hold on. Okay, Jeremy, try now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Okay.
Shaun wanted only to do a one-sided interview.
You know what? That's how it goes. So everybody that was commenting on social, can you hear Jeremy now? Jim, Ellen, Peter, can you hear him? Maybe.
Maybe. Can you hear me now?
Just hold on. Christy, can you hear him? Okay, I think we're good now. Yep, we can hear you. Awesome.
So none of that I said anyone could hear then.
Yeah, so let's start over there, Jeremy. What about the rainfall across Western Canada? Some areas want it, some people don't.
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned the Peace region, that varying parts of the Peace region just saturated with the amount of rain that's come, and west of Edmonton too. I mean, you look at some of the soil moisture maps, and some of the modeling is they're saturated. The rain that's coming today and potentially over the next week, I don't know where it's going to go because the soil just really can't take anymore. And it's preventing, again, still some of that 2019 crop from coming off. And some of it is still there. A lot of it did come off, but there's still some producers out there just working to get that off while seeding at the same time. And it's really about juggling fields right now. Where can I go? Where can I get stuff in? And producers are jumping back and forth between crops to try and get it in where they need to. So it's been a real battle. And then, what a contrast in terms of a province. You go south of Stettler, south of Red Deer into the east and down to Lethbridge, and man, what a rain. We haven't seen a rain like that in I don't know how long. When's the last time you've seen a rain like that, Shaun?
Over 2 inches. Some areas got 3, I even heard. Maybe there's even more in some areas I didn't talk to, but a timely rain to that significance, it has been years. Like we've gotten that kind of rain in the fall when we don't need it. But to get it in the Palliser Triangle when we need it at this time, man, it's been a while.
Yeah, and I mean, some of the areas were upwards of 70 millimeters. And if you think of how much rainfall a wheat crop and in some regards, a barley crop needs to get to flowering stage. You're talking about 100 millimeters of rain, so we're almost there. I mean, we have to take into consideration there will still be evaporation that comes from that, but that's a huge chunk of what's needed to get to filling and to get to anthesis. So, I mean, it's a great start to the season that I think a lot of producers are happy to see. It's going to help with establishment. It's going to help with evenness of the crop, and it's really just going to help all the way along down for the rest of the season. So it's exciting to see that. But again, those contrasts, and I mean, even west of 2, just north of Calgary, I know a few producers who were working really hard to get a lot of their 2019 crop off. Some of them, 1,500, 2,000 acres worth that still had to come off while seeding at the same time.
Dude, this 1 week period, right? And maybe it's 2 weeks. I don't know what it is, but this little pocket that we're in right now of time, we have people harvesting, seeding, and spraying.
Yeah,
all at the same
absolutely.
time. It's like the trifecta of work.
I got a picture from Claire's home down south of a producer out spraying his peas. Well, I get more shots of producers up north that are struggling to spray before their crop is coming up. Because I mean, a lot of this moisture is starting to lead into troubles with herbicide spray timing. It's caused a lot of challenges there.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because I look out my window now here in Lethbridge, and we had all that moisture, and with moisture, we celebrate and things are great because we needed it. But now we're chasing the wind, and it's really creating some problems because we got some weeds we want to take care of, and some of this crop went, because it was so chilly, some of this crop went in without a pre-burn, and so we've got to get the burn off done before the crop before the crop emerges. So I'll tell you, we just can't have enough of it.
Yeah, the next few weeks are going to be, it's going to continue to be a fight, because it's been a fight since last fall. We had the winter break where there's nothing you can do at that point, but the fight is continuing on at this point across the province. And, we had that nice splash of rain. And that is going to trigger all of those weeds wanting to emerge, and getting that application on before emergence. If you're having weeds before emergence of your crop, you're really taking a hit out of your yield before your crop even emerges from the soil. And a couple weeks ago, Brianne Timon did a presentation for us where she was talking about emergence before the crop of weeds and emergence after, and one weed emerging 1 week prior to the crop is equal to 100 weeds emerging 3 weeks after the crop, in terms of yield reduction for that crop. So It's so important to make sure that your crop, once it starts coming out of the ground, does not have competition. And a lot of people talk about, the fight for fertilizer and the fight for moisture. And it's not just about those things. There's actually a physiological interaction that happens between the weeds and the plants. Plants can respond. They know when there's a weed around them. And this has to do with, I'm going to get a little technical here, but the red to far red ratio. So plants take in light for photosynthesis, and light is a spectrum. It goes, violet, blue, red, yellow, and plants actually take in 2 different types of red light on that spectrum. They take in far red and short red light. And they'll reflect more far red light when they have competition, and the plants will respond to that. They'll know that there's competition around them, and then they actually change their genetics and their physiological responses in those situations. They know there's competition. They're then going, okay, we really need to get as much yield as we can, as quickly as we can. So it starts being more of a rush job rather than let's do this well and fill all these kernels. So there's a game you're playing there that is really detrimental if you don't hit it right.
Yeah, you know what, Dr. Clarence Swanton from the University of Guelph, you've probably been in a few of his presentations. From your time in Ontario. I remember being out there in the first year, 2010, and I remember him doing a presentation at the London Farm Show, and where he did an experiment where he had corn in a row and without weeds, and they full, sticking out, creating a canopy, and then he would stick potted weeds in between the rows, and those corn leaves would turn to provide more sunlight for the potted weeds. Crazy stuff how plants can communicate like that. It just blows your mind.
Yeah, I sometimes I think we don't give enough credit to plants for their ability to respond through contacts like that. And actually, I remember in one of my university classes, Professor Bloom, we actually grew lily plants at certain distances from a light bulb that only gave off far red light. And as you got further from that light, the height of the plant decreased because the plants that were closer to that far red light knew there was competition or responded as if there was competition and elongated taller. So they put more energy into growing taller than they did into reproduction. So it's very interesting how this can happen.
Do you want to fill me in? Kara Oosterhouse, that works for Real Agriculture, wants to know about this. It's time for the grasshopper dance. What is she talking about there?
I don't know. I haven't seen the grasshopper dance. I assume she's talking about the fact that, we are getting into a time now where some of the younger nymph of grasshoppers are starting to show up. And there was a map that came out just before actually all this rain came last week, where there was I can't remember exactly what the percentage was, but we were starting to see some development of young nymphs of grasshoppers. So I imagine because grasshoppers, when they're younger, they're smaller nymphs, they're more sensitive to that rainfall. It may have gotten knocked back a little bit, but knowing that potential was there, I think at this point it's probably a good idea to, in those, and go and check out the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network. They do maps of this every week. I look at it every week. It is so important. They give you updates on insects and everything. So they'll upgrade these maps as we go. But go out and take a look in some of those areas that they've highlighted.
Okay, great segue, because you mentioned the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network. I just posted a new episode of the Pest and Predator podcast, and I have a conversation with Dr. Megan Venkowski. And we talk exactly this. We talk about how they do the monitoring and what the benefits are. It's this new podcast all about beneficial insects. And I was just looking up here because we did an episode that's coming out soon that is about it's the beneficial for grasshoppers, but I can't. No one's gonna be surprised that I can't find. I'm missing a page out of my notes here, so I can't even.
It is the page.
I can't even. I know what it is. John Gavlosky talked to me about grasshopper egg predators, bee flies, blister beetles, field crickets, and ground beetles. How about that?
Ground beetles, man, what hard work those guys do, don't they? Like, when I go out to a field and when I see those little ground beetles scurrying around, I know there's a lot of advantage coming to those. And I think the Field Heroes campaign and the progress that we're making towards a better understanding of what that ecosystem looks like in our crop canopy, how all those different beneficials and non-advantageous insects interact, I think is a great direction for us to take to maybe get a better understanding of how we can use them to our advantage. So, yeah.
Got a question here from Jim Hale, Lancer, Saskatchewan. He got some rain.
I thought Jim might have a question.
Yeah, Jim always he's a frequent viewer of our RealAg live podcast. So here's what Jim's question is about: is rolling your cereal crop post emergence, and does it create crop injury? Which actually, does that have an effect on how much disease you have in the field?
So, this came up last year too. Someone didn't get out to roll their wheat early enough, and this question came up. And there hasn't been any research really done on this that I've been able to find. Most of it's done on peas or soybeans. But you really want to avoid rolling your wheat or any cereal when that first coleoptile is coming out of the soil. That is pushing the soil away, allowing those true leaves to actually push through. So if you roll before you're at the first or second true leaf stage, there's a risk that you're going to move some of that soil around and maybe break that coleoptile. And when that happens, you're not going to be able to get proper emergence of that wheat plant. So that's the first thing to consider when thinking about rolling. You want to make sure that you're delaying to that 2 to 3 leaf stage. The other thing you want to think about is you want to make sure you're rolling when you're in a drier situation. If you're rolling when you're wet, there's a chance you're going to get some mud. It's going to pick up some wheat plants, and you're going to start pulling them out of the ground. So you want to do it under drier conditions. I'd imagine, and it's going to depend on what type of soil you're on and how much residue, but there's a chance you're going to get some beating up of those leaves. And if you're beating up some of those leaves, potentially you're having some openings for some disease to come in. That being said, you still need to have the proper environmental conditions for disease to come, which means you need to have some warmth, you need to have some moisture for that to pop in. That plant is going to heal itself. It's going to work hard to heal itself pretty quickly, but you are opening yourself up to some risk depending on what those environmental conditions are. But that doesn't mean that that is directly impacting yield. And I think when I think about this, I think about some of the research that's been done on early season fungicides with wheat and barley, and how applying a fungicide at the herbicide timing stage, even when there is a bit of disease that you can see there, provided no yield benefit in the long run. And that's because, yes, there may be disease present on those earlier leaves, even in tillering, but unless that disease actually moves onto your yield-bearing leaves, so your flag leaf, your penultimate leaf, and onto the stem, there's not going to likely be a huge impact on yield. And that kind of is where that aligns with me, is that fungicide timing at herbicide timing research. And Sherry Stridehorse is actually currently doing some research on that as well. So it's that's what I would say about that question.
Now, tomorrow, you're going to be hosting one of your in-field webinars. Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission has been doing these in-field webinars. And tomorrow, your guest is one of my favorites. He's like, I've in terms of fertilizer specialists, I may have interviewed him the most. It is Ross McKenzie, retired from Alberta Ag. What time is that at?
So that is at 11 o'clock Mountain Standard Time tomorrow.
Perfect. Okay, so everybody should.
So make sure you register and all that stuff beforehand.
Good stuff. And then when you're done that, we're gonna have RealAg Live tomorrow in the afternoon, and we're gonna be talking corn and soybeans tomorrow. So you can just
catch it all. Exactly. You can catch it all.
There's no excuses not to be informed. Okay. Now, in that conversation, I'm sure this is going to come up. It is in-field, in-crop. That secondary supplement of in-crop N application, and it's becoming more and more popular as we try not to load at the front end, and especially in some of these down markets, people trying to figure out what kind of crop do they have in front of them. Now, if you're one of these people that backed off in the front, waiting for the rain, well, you got it. Now we're like, oh, maybe we need to top this up a little bit. What are some of the considerations?
Yeah, so I mean, I have had a couple of questions come my way already. As soon as that rain stopped, I got a few emails and texts come in and said, what do I need to do? I've been fertilizing for 25 bushels for the past 3 years because we haven't had any rain. Well, now I want to top it up. I'm expecting more. I've gotten all this rain. I mean, Milk River got almost 3 inches, I think. So they're asking the question of how do I bump this up? And I mean, there is a few factors that you need to consider when it comes to this. Is one, when you're applying nitrogen in crop, immediately your efficiency of uptake goes down. So when we banned nitrogen, and I had a conversation with Ross about this because he's my guy I go to when I ask questions about this too. And when you're talking about banning nitrogen with the seed or beside the seed, you're talking about a 70% uptake of that nitrogen that you're applying. That's about the efficiency that you're getting. When you're doing an in-crop nitrogen application, and if you're looking for yield bump, you're in that between tiller and elongation stage. You're more looking at around a 40 to 50% efficiency of uptake. So, and the reason you want to aim for that timeline is because you still need some time for that urea to break down. So you want to go as early as possible, but you don't want to be going when you start to get elongation, because then you're trampling, you're breaking some of those stems, and you're causing issues. So typically the best response you're going to see is in around that after tillering, before elongation timing. So if you're looking at applying a nitrogen, let's say you want to apply 30 pounds of N with urea, you can really only expect maybe 50% uptake with that. And that's assuming that you get a rain after the fact. So it's actually washing it into the roots because it needs to get washed in. It needs to move and change from urea to an actual uptake form of nitrates. And then that takes maybe 2 to 3 weeks for that to happen, for it to fully process. Now you can go with 28%, and a quarter of that is already available. So you can go with something like that, but you're still at risk of volatilization. And the one thing that I hear, which scares the crap out of me, Shaun, is people doing foliar applications for a yield increase where you're talking about actually spraying using spray nozzles. If you want to aim for a yield bump, drop nozzles, streamers, something that's going to get that liquid directly into the ground so it can go in. Otherwise,
down into the canopy.
Otherwise, your potential risk of burn, which is going to potentially delay that crop from moving, it's going to slow it down a little, and it's not being actually uptaken in the leaves that much. I mean, your efficiency of leaf uptake, I think, is in the 5% range. So uptake of that application, if you're doing foliar, is quite low. So you want to be doing something that's going to get it right to the soil. And one big thing that I'm going to recommend is to use a urease inhibitor. This is going to help mitigate some of that volatilization loss and help save some of that nitrogen so it can actually get into the soil and be used for uptake. So just some general factors to think about.
Good stuff. Hey, Colton has a question. I melted urea. How about, could you use that?
Yeah, you can use melted urea, and I haven't had a lot of experience with it, and I'm sure Wheat Pete has a good answer for this, because I know when I left Ontario, this was one thing that people were talking a lot about.
Okay.
And if you want to use melted urea, I'd suggest maybe reaching out to people who've had a bit more experience with it. But I know it takes a little bit of energy to actually melt that urea down because it is an endothermic reaction. So that means it takes a lot of energy to actually create that. So it makes that water really cold. So you want to start with warmer water. So it takes a little bit to do it. But in terms of risk, you still have risk of burn there, but it's still a high potential opportunity to use melted urea.
Yeah. Colton, thanks a lot for the question. I really appreciate it. Speaking of peat in Ontario, can we learn in this area of in-crop application of N? Like a lot of research has been done in corn. Can we pull some of that research across to spring wheat, or is that just too big of a leap, too big of different conditions? What are your thoughts on that?
So science is a very interesting thing. Science is about taking concepts from completely different areas of research and maybe completely different areas of the world and asking the question of, does this apply to my area? And it disheartens me sometimes when I hear people say, that doesn't matter. It happens in Ontario. That's a completely different environment. There's no way it would work here. And you almost dismiss it immediately. But a lot of the concepts that I see being utilized in Ontario and that I actually see being utilized in Alberta and Saskatchewan, there's a lot of intermixing that happens there. Yes, there are a few things that don't work. Soil types are different, the environment's different, we're much drier out here, our organic matter is lower in certain parts, and that needs to be taken into consideration. But to completely dismiss an agricultural practice because it's from a different area, I think we can look with a little bit finer tooth comb and ask the question of, where might this work and why wouldn't it work here? So I'm always looking to see what Ontario or the US or different parts of the world might be trying, because you never know what might actually work where we are.
I absolutely agree. No, like absolutely. I'm right there with you. That was the whole premise of real agriculture, is kind of learning from different areas. And sure, there's some stuff you can just throw it out, but you just get one little nugget, just one little thing, one little practice, and be like, I should actually try that. Not on my whole farm, but just like maybe do some trials and see if it can have a fit for me. For sure. The other thing is what I'm noticing right now, of course, we're into that time where the crop is out of the ground. We also got weeds coming to the ground, as we discussed. People trying to, taking photos of their crop, and sometimes the best parts, and sometimes you look how crappy this is, and you get the worst part of the field. Don't be making crop estimates based on what you see on Twitter. But it's always a good practice, though, to take good photos so you can share them with your agronomist, retail, whoever's providing you with some support.
Yeah, this is a topic that comes up all the time. It's agronomic challenges always have a multifaceted issue. Like there's multiple parts of why there might be agronomic issues, or why you're seeing this weed, or where this disease might come from. And when you're taking pictures, you need to think about not just what you're looking at, but what the environment around that particular thing you're looking at might contribute to the causation of what you're looking at. So when you're taking a picture of let's say you're taking a picture of a weed, and you shoot it off and say, hey, what is this weed? And it might look like a few other weeds because it's at its younger stage, but that it might be a weed that only grows in low parts of the field, or it might be a weed that only grows in more coarse soil on knolls. And being able to differentiate between those two means taking a picture of a wide angle of the field, getting a full picture of that, what that looks like. So when I get pictures in, I always ask, where in the field is it? What do surrounding areas look like? You like stuff to contrast with. So, I mean, if you're going to take a picture of an issue in the field, try taking 5 pictures. And it doesn't have to be specifically where you're looking at, but, big pictures of the field, comparisons side by side of what you're looking at, more than just one picture, because there's always factors that you need to eliminate when you're asking the question of what might this problem be. And more pictures helps create a clearer picture of what you might eliminate as a potential issue.
Yeah, good thoughts. Absolutely. Any tips out there for early season disease scouting?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the producers in those wetter parts of the province who saw a lot of moisture later in the season last year, and maybe saw increased disease because of that, should probably be checking more this year, because that inoculum is built there. So as we head into herbicide timing season, it's a good idea to not only focus on those weeds, but focus on the plants. Where you're looking at weeds, pull up a couple plants, look at the stems, look at the roots, look at those leaves, and see what potential issues might be there. I mean, especially for those areas in the north where maybe they've had 3 years, in some areas 4 years of really wet conditions, and they're coming back full rotation from what they were growing 4 years ago. That inoculum is there. So the risk is a little bit higher. And if we continue to see this moisture, like unfortunately we're seeing in those areas, I'm sure everyone's sick of hearing the disease triangle, but that environment factor continues to grow. We know the inoculum's there. You're putting that wheat or that barley back into that field that saw wheat or barley hopefully 4 or 3 years ago if you're doing good rotations. And that risk is there. So making sure that you're going out and taking a close look. And I'll push this again. If you are seeing disease early on some of those wheat and barley plants, a fungicide at herbicide timing through multiple research projects has shown no benefit. So it's a good indicator.
Oh, because remember we used to do like the half tilt rate.
Oh,
yeah,
no, you're selecting for fungicide resistance, and you're not providing any benefit to yield in the end. All the research has shown, even in the US, multiple research projects in Alberta, Saskatchewan, no benefit. All you do is select for fungicide resistance, which we don't want to be in that realm. We're already dealing with enough weeds. So if you do see disease early in your crop, and obviously rust is a different story. If you're starting to see rust, that's something that needs to be handled a little bit differently because it can move rather quickly. But if it's a typical foliar disease, it's an indicator to watch as you move again towards those yield-bearing leaves. As you move into those yield-bearing leaves, then you know that it's on the lower part of the plant. And if you're getting moist conditions, then you're saying, hey, I have the disease already. The moisture's there. My disease triangle is lining up. I better get some foliar fungicide to make sure that I'm ready to protect if I need to.
Hey, Jeremy, Kara's got a question. What do some of the early nutrient deficiencies look like?
So typically what I see for early foliar nutrient deficiencies is typically nitrogen. You're going to see just a general yellowing of the leaves. And this is the same for sulfur. If you're seeing those in cereals, nitrogen and sulfur can look somewhat similar sometimes. I find that sulfur is a little bit more patchy. You're finding it in areas where generally with nitrogen, it is almost across the whole field, or in larger patches that you'll start to see it. The other one that I see not as often, but sometimes is a bit of potassium deficiency, which can show up as purpling sometimes, but that can also be cold stress. Those are the big ones that I typically see. Zinc and manganese can sometimes show up, and to be honest, I can't remember exactly what those deficiencies look like at this point, but they can show up. We have areas in Alberta that sometimes we have zinc deficiencies. I mean, copper typically doesn't show up till a little bit later, and you get that pigtailing when you get quite a deficiency of copper and some stunting. Those are typically the ones that I would be looking for.
And we have no idea at this point about Fusarium for this year. Like the stage is being set. You know, we've had some moisture, but we're just way too early to tell, right?
Yeah. There's no way you can predict what weather is going to be like when it comes to that flowering time, or that heading time, I should say. But we know that last year we saw an uptick in the occurrence of Fusarium, specifically in that northwest part of the province, and that's again contributed from that moisture, which means again we know that inoculum is there. So if we head into that flag leaf timing, you should be going to the Fusarium risk map, which Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba all have one, and look to see what the risk is in your area. And the reason I say start looking at the flag leaf timing, because if the risk is high when you're headed into heading timing, an earlier application, you can get a Fusarium infection as soon as that head is out of the boot. We've all been targeting that flower timing, which absolutely that's an ideal time to be spraying. But if your Fusarium risk is really high, as soon as those heads are coming out of the ground, you want to be aiming for that 75 to 100% head emergence timing. So that's why you want to start looking at that flag leaf timing so you can be prepared. But if you don't see a risk at that time, continue to watch, and then you can make the decision on whether you want to do a later application or not. But we're at a higher. To me, I'm on watch for it because I know we've seen an uptick last year.
Yeah.
Hopefully this weather subsides in the northwest and we get a reduction in the amount of rainfall. But if it continues to be moist, that inoculum is going to be there and that risk is going to be there. So we need to be watchful, because we don't want to be at a point where it is completely prevalent across the whole province. I think, as Pete would say, it's the epicenter in Ontario. I don't want to see Alberta in that way. So the longer we prevent it from getting to that point, the better off we'll be.
Well, at least we're acknowledging it's here. That's a good first step. Okay, I got a question. You see what I did there? I got a question from Billy. He's watching on YouTube. He says, how would a super high iron level affect my wheat yields? I seem to have all good fertility levels on my soil tests, but have super high iron and can't break some yield barriers.
Oh, fertility questions are always a little bit complex, because then the next question is what is your yield barrier and why do you think that iron is what is restricting it? I haven't run into any situations where iron specifically is a challenge. I assume that there's a toxicity level at some point. It's not something that I have come across. So my question would be, like, why does he feel like iron? Billy, why do you feel like iron is what might be restricting you? Do you have some fields in other areas that don't have that kind of iron level and you're seeing higher levels, or is it across your entire farm?
Yeah.
I would have to do some digging to see what kind of response level we get from certain iron levels. There's going to be a toxicity level. All nutrients get to that point. What it is, I couldn't tell you. So potentially, but is that what's causing it? I couldn't give you an answer on that.
Thanks for the question, Billy. Really appreciate it. You know, it is difficult sometimes to sort of sort all that out, trying to figure out what is that one variable, because we're always searching and have this quest to figure out that one thing that is causing the problem, and sometimes it's a little bit more. Unfortunately, it kind of works out where it's not that simple. Question. Go ahead.
I always have. It's funny you say that, Shaun. I always have a direction that I try and. When I'm approached with a problem, a producer says, "I see this. It must be because of this." My first thing in my head is, I want to find all the reasons why it's not that, because you've already determined in your head that is the reason.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a good way to do it. I like.
Well,
that.
I mean, otherwise you keep finding reasons. You look for the reasons for that to be the issue, and you ignore all the other symptoms that may be actually causing it. So the real question is what else, or why wouldn't this be the case? So start asking those questions, and I mean, it's hard in all scenarios to run that, and I couldn't give you too many examples right now, but it's a good mindset to run at, rather than assuming it's when it's the flag in the sand saying, "Look at me, I might be the issue." Okay, I see you there. I'm going to come back to you, but what else might be causing this?
You could have that approach in the markets too. I think with a lot of times we get sort of like, you get sort of not looking at all the other variables or other things that are out there. Hey, Ken has a question. He's watching on Facebook. He says, any benefit to spraying at both flag leaf and flowering for Fusarium, or should a person just wait and spray once at Fusarium timing?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a challenging question, because obviously the cost of spraying both is what holds a lot of producers back from doing both. If the cost wasn't there, for sure, I would say spray at flag leaf timing and then spray at head timing, because really what you're doing there is you're looking to protect yourself against two completely different things. When you're spraying at flag leaf timing, you're looking to protect against disease that's going to reduce your photosynthetic capacity, which means it's going to reduce your ability to fill that grain, and it's going to not be able to allow you to get that full yield potential. Where if you're spraying at Fusarium timing, you're looking to reduce the amount of Fusarium infected kernels. You're looking to potentially reduce the risk of dawn, which could reduce your marketability. So there's a reason to go for both, and there's a reason to potentially split it. A lot of the research that we've seen says that you gain just as much yield advantage from spraying at head timing as compared to flag leaf timing. So if you're going into flag leaf timing and you're not seeing a lot of disease, then yes, absolutely delay until head timing. But if you're going into flag leaf timing and you've done your scouting at herbicide timing, and you've seen some disease and you know that you're getting some risk and you're starting to see it go up the crop, then you almost have no choice but to say, I need to protect this flag leaf. Because even if you do protect your head later, you have no photosynthetic area to fill that grain. So it's really about establishing the question of, do I need to spray a flag leaf timing? No. Okay, then delay to my head timing. We have seen a bit of a yield bump when you spray both above and beyond just a head or just a flag, but the yield advantage did not correlate to a economic advantage from the cost of spraying both.
Okay. Good stuff. Thanks for the question, Ken. Hey, we're almost out of time. We said we're going a half hour. We're actually 40 minutes into this. This is good. Hey, I got a question here from Chad. It's back to the iron thing. He says iron toxicity can cause phosphorus and manganese deficiency. So P with the seed and higher rates of P, possibly a foliar, could be something to look at for iron deficiency in wheat. I think the question is, that's a statement, and the question is, if you were concerned about iron levels, could you do a tissue test to confirm that?
I would have to dig a little bit further in it to confirm what he has to say. I'm not going to say yes, that's the case. Like I believe you, but if it is reducing the amount of P uptake, then potentially you would see a reduction. One thing you could do is, if we know that it is reducing the amount of potential phosphorus uptake, is to do trials of more that would, put more phosphorus down and see if that increased availability of phosphorus promotes a higher yield. So there's ways of testing it, but again, I don't want to speak too far into it because it's just I'm not as
That's
familiar
cool.
with the iron side.
Hey, finally, we were talking about spraying earlier. People having to bounce back from field to field. That possibly means, switching products, not in the most efficient kind of manner, right? We're not being able to spray all of our fields with one product, product A, and then switch to B and do all those fields. We're having to possibly go back and forth based on staging. So what does that mean, like in terms of being careful on the clean out so that we don't create problems for ourselves? Like, need to just be extra careful, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes without saying when you're in those situations, when you're jumping back and forth between herbicides, read the label, call your product specialist, and make sure they're giving you directions on how to properly clean that out if you're not too sure, and just follow the proper protocol. I think a number of producers have had issues with clean out in previous years when new products changed their formula. So I don't think it's anything we're unfamiliar with. But you're right, Shaun. We're rushing to try and get this crop in as quickly as we can. We're already significantly delayed. The other thing I would add to that is if you had a plan for a field 5 days ago and rain delayed you, and you're going in to implement that plan, almost a week later, it might be a good idea to go in and recheck that field, see if you still have the same weed issues that you're looking for, or if that was meant to be a pre-emerge after you seed, making sure that crop isn't coming out of the ground yet. Because a lot of these pre-emerge are 3 days after seeding. And then if you get damage to that crop, you're outside of that labeled window. So if you're spraying something like that, making sure that you're checking the label, making sure that you're talking to your chem rep and letting them know what's going on so they can give you guidance, or they can come out and check themselves too. Because if they're giving you direction and there's risk to your crop, it's good to have that support there. But yes, I would say, make sure you're taking the time on some of this stuff because, we're already delayed enough. If you go through and you have some residual active ingredient from a different chemical, that's going to potentially delay your crop a little bit longer, and then you've shot yourself in the foot even more. So it's easy to get caught up in the rush because this stuff needs to get in the ground and it needs to get done, and that's why I'm always a fan of checklists. Always checklists. Make sure that you like a pilot. It's great to have that list of, okay, did I do this? Did I do this? Did I do this? And then you can be sure as you move forward that you're not putting yourself at further risk.
Well, hey, let's go back to the beginning of the conversation. If I had a checklist at the beginning of the broadcast, I would have had on there to make sure the Skype feed was not muted. Right?
Well, if you want, I can build you a checklist, Shaun.
Oh, man, I tell you what. Hey, Jeremy, this has been a lot of fun. Tomorrow on RealAg Live, our guest is going to be Neil McGregor. He's the market development agronomist in Eastern Ontario for Pride Seeds. We'll be talking corn and bean agronomy tomorrow. Thursday, it'll be Ted Seaford from Zaner Ag Hedge. We're talking markets. Hey, Jeremy, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Shaun. It was a blast.
Thanks a lot for tuning in, everybody. Thank you very much for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live.